The pipe wrench slipped from my grip for the third time, clattering against the cabinet under our kitchen sink. Water dripped steadily onto my forehead as I lay on my back, squinting up at the stubborn connection that had been leaking for weeks. "Why do you always have to know where I am?" Hannah's voice drifted down from upstairs, sharp with irritation. I froze. The wrench grew heavy in my hand. "It's not like that," she continued, her tone softening into something I didn't recognize. "You know I can't just drop everything and come over whenever you want." My wife Hannah had been on the phone a lot lately, always stepping out of rooms when I entered, always with excuses about work calls and client consultations. As a partner at Morrison and Associates, she did work long hours, but this conversation didn't sound like business. I held my breath, straining to hear more, but her voice faded as she moved deeper into our bedroom. The water kept dripping, each drop landing squarely between my eyes like some kind of cosmic joke. Apparently, knowing my wife's location was now controlling behavior. Fine. Let's see how she liked not knowing where I was. I finished the repair in silence, my mind racing. 22 years of marriage, and Hannah had never spoken to me with that particular tone. Intimate, secretive, guilty. The way she'd said, "You know I can't," suggested this wasn't the first conversation of its kind. Our town of Millfield had seen better decades. The textile mills that once employed half the population had closed 15 years ago, leaving behind empty brick buildings and a main street dotted with vacant storefronts. Those of us who stayed made do with what remained: small businesses, service jobs, and in my case, a struggling engineering consulting firm that specialized in municipal water systems and the occasional residential project. Hannah's law practice thrived in this environment. Divorces, property disputes, and small-time litigation kept Morrison and Associates busy. She'd joined as a junior associate 12 years ago and made partner 3 years back. Her success should have made me proud. It did, mostly. But lately, it felt like her rising star was pulling her further away from our shared orbit. I cleaned up my tools and headed to the garage, where I kept my real sanctuary, a heavy bag hanging from the rafters and a small collection of weights I'd accumulated over the years. Boxing had been my outlet since high school, and I still trained a few kids at Murphy's gym downtown twice a week. The physical exertion helped me think. As I wrapped my hands, I replayed Hannah's phone conversation. The secrecy, the defensive tone, the way she'd been coming home later, claiming depositions and client meetings that seemed to multiply by the week. 3 sharp jabs to the heavy bag sent vibrations through the garage rafters. Hannah appeared in the doorway, still holding her phone. "Everything okay down here?" I heard banging. "Just working out some frustration," I said, not turning around. "Plumbing's fixed. Thanks." She hesitated. "Listen, I have to go back to the office tonight. We're prepping for the Henderson case, and Evan wants to review the depositions." Evan Morrison. Senior partner, early 40s, divorced twice, and Hannah's direct supervisor. I'd met him at firm parties, the kind of guy who wore expensive suits and talked about his weekend house in the Hamptons. Everything about him screamed entitlement. "Mo on a Saturday night?" I asked. "Law doesn't keep business hours, you know that." Moni haven't ding to. I did know that. But I also knew Hannah well enough to recognize when she was rehearsing an explanation, rather than giving one spontaneously. "What time will you be back?" Mon, her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't know. Don't wait up." After she left, I sat in our living room, staring at the framed photos on the mantelpiece. Our wedding day, vacations from happier times, our daughter Emma's graduation from high school last spring. Emma was in her freshman year at State now, 3 hours away, calling less frequently as she built her own life. The house felt hollow without her energy filling the spaces between Hannah's absences and my growing suspicions. I picked up Hannah's laptop from the coffee table. She'd left it behind in her hurry. The screen was locked, but I knew her password. She'd never bothered changing it from our anniversary date. Her email was open to the law firm's internal system. Nothing immediately suspicious, just case files and scheduling messages. But her browser history told a different story. Hotel websites, restaurant reservations for 2, a lingerie boutique I'd never heard of, with recent orders that hadn't appeared in our bedroom. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Hannah was having an affair, and she wasn't being particularly careful about hiding it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Murphy's gym smelled like sweat, leather, and decades of ambition. I arrived early Monday morning, needing the familiar rhythm of training before facing another day of pretending everything was normal at home. You're hitting like you're angry at something, said Jerry Murphy, the gym's owner and my old coach. He was 73, built like a fire hydrant, and had an uncanny ability to read people's emotional states through their boxing form. Just working through some stuff, I replied, unwrapping my hands. Wife trouble? I looked at him sharply. Jerry had known Hannah almost as long as I had. They'd always gotten along well at gym events and neighborhood barbecues. What makes you say that? 25 years training fighters, 30 years married to the same woman. I know the signs. He handed me a towel. You want to talk about it? Or you want to keep beating up my equipment? The equipment's cheaper than a divorce lawyer. Jerry laughed, but his eyes stayed serious. That depends on the lawyer. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own marriage. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. Hannah's schedule, her phone habits, the mileage on her car. I found receipts in her purse for restaurants we'd never visited together. I noticed her working late always seemed to coincide with Evan Morrison's calendar, based on the firm's public event listings. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Hannah claimed she was having dinner with her best friend Marcy to discuss Marcy's messy divorce. But when I drove past Marcy's house around 9 o'clock, her car was in the driveway and her lights were on. No sign of Hannah. I drove to the Riverside Inn, a discreet hotel on the outskirts of town that catered to business travelers and people who valued privacy. Hannah's silver BMW was parked next to a black Mercedes, the first recognized from the law firm's parking lot. For 20 minutes, I sat in my truck, staring at those two cars and feeling 22 years of marriage crumble around me. Part of me wanted to storm into the hotel and confront them. Part of me wanted to drive home and pretend I'd never seen anything. Instead, I got out and walked over to the Mercedes. The vanity plate read, Counsel. Evan's idea of clever, no doubt. I pulled out my keys and dragged them along the driver's side, leaving a deep scratch from headlight to taillight. Then I let the air out of the rear tire and left a note under the windshield wiper. Homewrecker. It was petty and juvenile, but it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in weeks. Hannah came home after midnight, claiming Marcy had been really emotional and needed extra support. She went straight to the shower without kissing me goodnight. A small detail that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else, but felt like confirmation to me. The next morning, she was different, jumpy. She kept checking her phone and looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Everything okay? I asked over coffee. Fine, just tired. She paused. Did you go anywhere last night, after I left? Why would you ask that? No reason. Just wondering. I smiled and sipped my coffee. Why do you always have to know where I am? Her face went pale. She recognized her own words from the phone conversation I'd overheard, though she didn't know I'd heard them. The guilt in her expression was answer enough. I have to get to work, she said, grabbing her purse and rushing out. That afternoon, Emma called from college. Her voice was tight with anger. Dad, what did you do to Mom's boss's car? News traveled fast in a town like Millfield. Someone had seen me in the hotel parking lot, or maybe Evan had figured out who was responsible for his vandalism. What makes you think I did anything? Mom's crying. She says you're being controlling and paranoid. She says you followed her and caused a scene. I haven't caused any scenes, Emma, yet. What's that supposed to mean? It means your mother and I are having some problems, and they're between us. Don't let her drag you into the middle of this. She's not dragging me anywhere. I can see what's happening. You're being crazy jealous and taking it out on innocent people. Innocent people, if only she knew. Emma, there are things you don't understand about this situation. Then explain them to me. I wanted to. The words were right there, ready to spill out. But Emma was 19 years old and still believed her parents' marriage was solid. I couldn't be the one to shatter that illusion, at least not over the phone. Just be careful who you trust, okay? People aren't always who they pretend to be. She hung up on me. That evening, Hannah didn't come home at all. She sent a text around 10 o'clock. Staying at Marcy's tonight. Need some space to think. I drove past Marcy's house again. Hannah's car wasn't there. The Morrison and Associates annual client appreciation party was held at the Millfield Country Club, a venue that managed to be both pretentious and shabby, much like the town itself. Hannah had insisted I attend, probably to maintain appearances, though she'd barely spoken to me in the 3 days since her overnight disappearance. I put on my best suit and practiced my smile in the bathroom mirror. If Hannah wanted to play happy couple in public while carrying on her affair, I could play along. but I was done being the oblivious husband. The country club's main ballroom was decorated with white tablecloths and centerpieces that probably cost more than most Millfield residents made in a week. Hannah worked the room like the accomplished professional she was, introducing me to clients and colleagues with practiced ease. "This is my husband, Jack," she said to an elderly couple I didn't recognize. "He's an engineer. He keeps our town's water flowing." "How interesting," the woman replied with the polite disinterest reserved for people in unglamorous professions. Evan Morrison appeared at Hannah's elbow, resplendent in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Jack, good to see you again." His handshake was firm and confident, the grip of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Hannah tells me you've been working on the new municipal treatment plant project." "Among other things," I replied. "I've been keeping busy. Lots of interesting projects lately." Something in my tone made Hannah glance at me sharply, but Evan seemed oblivious. "That's great. We need more dedicated public servants in this town." He turned to Hannah. "Speaking of dedication, your wife has been putting in incredible hours on the Henderson case, really going above and beyond." "Oh, I know all about Hannah's long hours," I said. "She's very committed to her work, very hands-on." Hannah's face flushed. "Jack, I was just telling Evan how much I appreciate his mentorship. It's not every boss who takes such a personal interest in their employees' development." Evan preened at what he took for a compliment. Hannah looked like she wanted to disappear. The evening progressed with painful normalcy. I made small talk with lawyers and their spouses, ate rubbery chicken, and watched Hannah and Evan interact with the practiced ease of people who spend a lot of private time together. They had inside jokes, shared glances, and a physical awareness of each other that spoke of intimacy. When the speeches began, I saw my opportunity. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "we'd like to invite some of our clients to share a few words about their experience with Morrison and Associates." I stood up before Hannah could stop me. "I'd love to say something," I announced, walking toward the microphone. "Jack, no," Hannah whispered, but I was already on stage. The room quieted as I adjusted the microphone. 100 faces looked up at me expectantly. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Jack Patterson, and I've had the unique pleasure of watching Morrison and Associates from the inside, so to speak." I found Hannah in the crowd. Her face was white with panic. "You see, my wife Hannah works here, and I've gotten to observe the firm's commitment to personal service." A few people chuckled, thinking I was building to a compliment. "They really believe in getting close to their clients, building intimate relationships, going the extra mile, staying late, working weekends, whatever it takes to satisfy their clients' needs." Hannah was shaking her head frantically. Evan looked confused, but not yet alarmed. "In fact, I'd like to propose a toast." I raised my water glass. "To Morrison and Associates, where the partners really know how to take care of business, and to trusting your partners, in business and in bed." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Some people laughed nervously, unsure if they'd missed a joke. Others looked scandalized. Hannah stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. Evan finally caught on. His face darkened as he strode toward the stage. "That's enough," he said, reaching for the microphone. "Oh, I'm just getting started," I replied, pulling it away from him. "See, folks, there's something beautiful about a workplace where—" Evan grabbed my wrist. "Give me that microphone. Or what, you'll take me to court? I hear you're very good at handling multiple cases at once." He yanked the microphone from my hand, and I stumbled backward. In the ensuing scuffle, I accidentally knocked over the water pitcher on the nearby table, soaking Evan's expensive suit. "You crazy son of a—" Evan started. "Gentlemen, please." The MC rushed over as security guards appeared from somewhere. I raised my hands in mock surrender. "Sorry, folks. Sometimes the truth spills out, just like that water. Enjoy the rest of your evening." Hannah caught up with me in the parking lot, her heels clicking angrily on the asphalt. "What is wrong with you?" she screamed. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Have I lost my mind? That's rich, coming from someone who's been lying to me for months. I don't know what you're talking about. The Riverside Inn ring a bell? How about those restaurant receipts in your purse? Or maybe the lingerie you bought but never wore for me?" She stopped walking. For a moment the mask slipped, and I saw the woman I'd married. Vulnerable, scared, caught. "Jack, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you're sleeping with your boss while lying to our daughter about what a controlling husband I am?" Can you explain why you're making me look like a fool while you parade around town with your affair? It's not what you think. Then what is it, Hannah? Enlighten me. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I want you to move out, she said finally. Excuse me? You heard me. This behavior tonight, it's unacceptable. I can't live with someone who would humiliate me like that. I laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the country club's brick facade. I'm the one who's unacceptable? I'm not the one cheating on my spouse. You're paranoid and controlling, and I'm done with it. Fine, I'll pack my things. But Hannah? I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. This isn't over, not by a long shot. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of her in my rearview mirror, standing alone under the country club's entrance lights, her perfect facade finally cracking. They wanted a villain? I was just getting started. I moved into the lakeside cabin my father had left me, a modest two-bedroom structure about 15 minutes outside town that I'd been using as a weekend retreat. It needed work, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was private. The first week of separation was surreal. I'd wake up expecting to hear Hannah in the shower or see her coffee mug in the sink. Instead, I had silence, solitude, and a growing sense of purpose that surprised me with its clarity. Emma called on Thursday, her voice cold and disappointed. Mom told me what happened at the party. How could you embarrass her like that? Did she tell you why I was upset? She said you've been paranoid and jealous, following her around, vandalizing people's cars. Dad, this isn't like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. What's that supposed to mean? It means people change, Emma. Sometimes they have to. I spent my days working on the cabin and my evenings planning. Hannah thought she could control the narrative, paint me as the unstable husband while she played the victim. But I had advantages she didn't know about. 20 years in municipal engineering had taught me how small towns really worked. Information flowed through predictable channels: the coffee shop, the post office, the gym, the beauty salon. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and secrets had a way of surfacing when you knew where to look. I started with Mrs. Dalton, our elderly neighbor who had an unobstructed view of our driveway and the curiosity of a professional gossip. Such a shame about you and Hannah, she said when I stopped by to pick up some mail that had been delivered to her address by mistake. Though I have to say, I wondered about all those late nights. Late nights? Oh yes, dear. She'd leave around 7 or 8 in the evening, sometimes not come back until after midnight. I noticed because my bedroom faces your driveway, and her headlights would wake me up. How often? 3, 4 times a week for the past few months. I assumed it was work, but she leaned closer conspiratorially. I saw that fancy car parked at your house a few times when you weren't home. Black Mercedes with those personalized plates. Mrs. Dalton was a treasure trove of information. Hannah had been careless, bringing Evan to our house, using our bed for her affair. The violation felt personal in a way that hotel rooms hadn't. My next stop was Murphy's gym, where Jerry was training a heavyweight who looked like he could bench press a small car. Heard you moved out, Jerry said without preamble. News travels fast. Faster when you make a scene at the country club. Half the town's talking about it. What are they saying? Depends who you ask. Some folks think you lost your mind. Others figure Hannah must have done something to deserve it. He paused his workout to look at me directly. Which is it? She's been having an affair with her boss. I have proof. Jerry nodded slowly. That explains the anger in your punches lately. What are you going to do about it? I'm still figuring that out. Well, whatever you decide, be smart about it. Prison orange isn't your color. I laughed despite myself. I'm not planning to hurt anyone, Jerry, but I'm not going to let them make me the villain in this story either. That evening, I drove to the law firm's office building. Most of the lights were off, but I could see activity on the 3rd floor, where Morrison and Associates had their offices. Hannah's car was in the parking lot, along with Evan's Mercedes, now sporting a fresh paint job to cover my earlier artistic expression. I parked across the street and waited. At 9:30, they emerged together, Evan's hand on the small of Hannah's back, in a gesture that was intimate and possessive. They talked for a few minutes by their cars. Then Hannah got into the Mercedes with him. I followed them to Evan's downtown condo, a converted warehouse space that probably cost more than most people's houses. They went inside together, and the lights came on in what I assumed was the bedroom. I sat in my truck for an hour, watching those lit windows and feeling something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Hannah had made her choice. Now I was going to make mine. The next morning, I called in a favor from Tony Ricci, who ran the town's only private investigation service. Tony and I had worked together on a municipal fraud case a few years back, and he owed me one. I need surveillance photos, I told him. My wife and her boss. I want documentation of their affair. Jack, you sure about this? Once you have those pictures, there's no going back. I'm already past the point of no return, Tony. I just need evidence. He had the photos within a week. Hannah and Evan entering his condo together, kissing in the parking lot of an upscale restaurant, holding hands as they walked into the Riverside Inn. The images were professionally shot and undeniably damning, but looking at them, I felt something unexpected. Not heartbreak, but relief. The uncertainty was over. Now I could act. I made copies of the photos and started distributing them strategically. A few went to partners at competing law firms, along with anonymous notes about ethical violations. Others went to clients of Morrison and Associates, with suggestions that they might want to reconsider their representation. But my masterpiece was the package I sent to the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Along with the photos, I included documentation of Hannah's access to confidential client information and Evan's history of workplace relationships. I didn't make any specific accusations, I just presented the evidence and let them draw their own conclusions. Within days, the rumors started circulating. Hannah called me, her voice shaking with rage. You sent those pictures to my clients, didn't you? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Jack. The Hendersons fired us today. Mrs. Chen wants to meet with another attorney. Someone's been spreading rumors about my professional conduct. Maybe people are just starting to see the real you. This is harassment. I could have you arrested. For what? Telling the truth? You're the one who chose to have an affair with your boss. I'm just making sure people know what kind of person they're dealing with. You're destroying my career. You destroyed our marriage. I'm just returning the favor. She hung up on me. But I knew I'd gotten to her. Hannah's professional reputation was everything to her. Without it, she was just another small-town lawyer in a dying industrial city. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The Millfield Autumn Festival was the town's biggest social event, a desperate attempt to attract tourism and boost local businesses. Main Street would be closed to traffic, filled with craft booths, food vendors, and a small stage where local musicians and community leaders gave speeches about the town's bright future. I'd been planning my appearance for weeks. Hannah had been avoiding me since our last phone conversation, communicating only through her lawyer about separation terms. Emma had stopped calling altogether, apparently convinced that I'd suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Even Jerry at the gym was treating me with cautious concern. They all thought I'd lost control. They had no idea how in control I actually was. The festival was in full swing when I arrived. Families wandering between booths selling handmade crafts and overpriced kettle corn. I spotted Hannah near the stage, talking to Mayor Collins about some municipal legal matter. She looked tired, stressed, and older than her 38 years. Evan was nowhere to be seen. According to my sources, he'd been keeping a low profile since the ethics investigation began. Funny how quickly the mighty could fall when their secrets came to light. I made my way through the crowd, greeting neighbors and acquaintances with the kind of friendly small talk that had always come naturally to me. People seemed surprised to see me. Apparently, Hannah had been telling everyone I was having some kind of breakdown. "Jack, good to see you out and about," said Bill Henderson, whose divorce case had been one of Hannah's recent losses. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected, Bill. Sometimes a change of perspective is exactly what you need. I heard about you and Hannah. Sorry, man. These things happen." "They do indeed, though usually not with your boss in your own bedroom." Bill's eyes widened. "Jesus, Jack, really? Really? But hey, life goes on, right?" I continued working the crowd, dropping hints and innuendos, watching as the gossip spread from person to person like ripples in a pond. By the time Mayor Collins introduced the afternoon speakers, half the festival knew that Hannah Patterson was having an affair with her boss. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced, "we'd like to invite some of our community members to share their thoughts about Millfield's future." I'd spoken at the festival before, back when Hannah and I were the picture of small-town success. People knew me, trusted me, saw me as a reliable voice of reason. That reputation was about to serve me well. I walked up to the stage as the mayor finished his introduction. Hannah saw me coming and went pale, but there was nothing she could do without causing a scene. Thank you, Mayor Collins, I said, taking the microphone. It's good to be here today, celebrating our community and the values that make Millfield special. The crowd settled in, expecting the usual platitudes about local pride and economic development. I've lived in this town for over 20 years, I continued. I've raised a daughter here, built a business here, and tried to contribute to our community in whatever way I could. I've always believed that Millfield's strength comes from our honesty, our integrity, and our willingness to stand up for what's right. A few people applauded. Hannah was staring at me with undisguised horror. But lately, I've learned some hard truths about the people we trust, the institutions we respect, and the difference between public facades and private realities. The crowd was getting restless, sensing that this wasn't going to be a typical festival speech. For example, did you know that some of our most prominent citizens, people who stand up here and talk about community values, are willing to lie, cheat, and betray the people closest to them when it serves their interests? Murmurs rippled through the audience. I could see Hannah moving toward the stage, but the crowd was too thick for her to reach me quickly. Take my wife, for instance, Hannah Patterson, partner at Morrison & Associates, pillar of the community, devoted mother and spouse. I paused, letting the tension build. Except she's been having an affair with her boss for the past 6 months, using our home for their meetings while lying to everyone about working late. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. Hannah had stopped trying to reach the stage and was standing frozen in the middle of the crowd, her face flushed with humiliation. But that's not the worst part, I continued, raising my voice over the noise. The worst part is how she's been telling everyone that I'm the problem, that I'm controlling, paranoid, mentally unstable. She's been playing the victim while carrying on her affair, trying to destroy my reputation to cover up her own behavior. Jack, stop! Hannah's voice cut through the crowd, but I was just getting started. And then there's Evan Morrison, her partner in more ways than one. A man who's been using his position of authority to pursue a relationship with a subordinate, violating every ethical standard of his profession. A man who's currently under investigation by the State Bar Association for his conduct. The crowd was in full uproar now. Some people were shouting for me to stop. Others were demanding more details. I could see Mayor Collins frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. But here's what really gets me, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. They thought they could make me the villain in their story. They thought they could gaslight me, isolate me, and make everyone believe that I was the problem. Hannah was crying now, tears streaming down her face as neighbors and friends stared at her with a mixture of shock and judgment. Well, here's the truth, Millfield. Sometimes the person everyone thinks is crazy is actually the only one telling the truth. Sometimes the victim is really the villain. And sometimes, I looked directly at Hannah, the people you trust most are the ones who betray you worst. I set the microphone down and walked off the stage, leaving behind a crowd in chaos and a wife whose carefully constructed reputation lay in ruins around her feet. As I made my way through the stunned crowd, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The truth was finally out, and everyone could see Hannah and Evan for what they really were. Mrs. Dalton caught my arm as I passed her booth. Well, she said, with obvious satisfaction, I always knew there was something off about all those late nights. I smiled and kept walking. Behind me, I could hear Hannah's voice, desperate and pleading, trying to explain herself to anyone who would listen. But the damage was done. In a town like Millfield, reputation was everything, and hers was now thoroughly destroyed. My phone buzzed with a text message. Emma. Dad, what have you done? I typed back. I told the truth, something your mother forgot how to do. Then I turned off my phone and drove home to my cabin by the lake, where the only sounds were wind in the trees and water lapping against the shore. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The next morning brought a parade of consequences. Hannah's law firm released a statement about personnel changes and maintaining professional standards. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the festival incident, carefully avoiding specific allegations while making it clear that Millfield's legal community was in turmoil. Emma called, her voice cold with anger. You destroyed Mom's career. Are you happy now? I exposed the truth about your mother's character. What happens to her career is a consequence of her choices, not mine. She's talking about leaving town, starting over somewhere else. That's probably for the best. Millfield has a long memory. What about us? What about our family? Your mother ended our family when she decided to have an affair. I just made sure everyone knew about it. Emma hung up on me, but I wasn't surprised. She was young, idealistic, and still believed that family loyalty meant covering up uncomfortable truths. She'd understand eventually, when she was older and had experienced more of the world's casual cruelties. Hannah tried calling several times over the next few days, but I didn't answer. She sent emails that I deleted without reading. She even showed up at the cabin once, but I didn't come to the door. We had nothing left to say to each other. 3 weeks later, I heard through the town gossip network that Hannah had accepted a position with a firm in another state. She was leaving Millfield, probably forever, taking with her nothing but the clothes on her back and the wreckage of her reputation. Evan Morrison had resigned from his partnership and was reportedly considering a career change. The state bar investigation was ongoing, but his legal career was effectively over regardless of the outcome. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but no regret either. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. The difference was that I had been honest about my intentions from the beginning. You called me controlling, Hannah. Now you can control the mess you made. Good luck. As autumn turned to winter, I settled into my new life at the cabin. I kept my engineering practice, took on more training duties at Murphy's gym, and slowly rebuilt the social connections that Hannah's campaign against me had damaged. People in town treated me with a mixture of sympathy and wariness. They understood why I'd done what I did, but they also knew I was capable of total warfare when provoked. That was fine with me. Sometimes being feared was more valuable than being liked. Emma and I exchanged occasional texts, brief and formal communications about practical matters. She was still angry, still convinced that I had overreacted and destroyed our family for no good reason. But she was also curious about my side of the story, asking careful questions about the timeline of events and Hannah's behavior. Time would tell whether our relationship could be salvaged, but I wasn't going to apologize for refusing to be a victim in my own life. The lake was frozen now, a smooth sheet of ice that reflected the winter sky like a mirror. I spent my evenings sitting on the cabin's small deck, watching the sun set over the water and listening to the absolute silence that only comes with snow and solitude. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was honest, and after months of living with lies and deception, honesty felt like a luxury I could finally afford.